I want you to imagine the smell of pitch in the night air.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is grim.
It is. I mean, we're talking about Rome right around the mid-60s AD,
Mm.
during the reign of Emperor Nero.
Right. A terrifying time to be alive.
Exactly. And if you were walking through the imperial gardens at night, the pathways, they wouldn't be lit by torches on wooden poles.
No, they definitely weren't.
They were lit by human beings,
Yeah.
Christians.
Yeah.
They were covered in tar, tied to stakes, and literally set on fire just to illuminate the emperor's evening strolls.
It's an almost unimaginable level of horror.
It really is, and it forces this very blunt question, right? Why on earth would anyone endure that?
Exactly. Why stay?
Right. Like, why would you allow yourself to be thrown to wild beasts or burned alive for a man who was, by all Roman standards, a pathetic, crucified criminal?
Yeah. A complete failure in the eyes of the empire.
So what did those early believers know about this man that made them willing to endure such absolute devastation?
I mean, that is the ultimate historical and spiritual question.
It is.
And to answer it, you have to realize that those Roman Christians, they weren't holding on to some generic therapeutic idea of a religious teacher.
Right, like a life coach or something.
Exactly. They were holding on to a very specific, fiercely debated identity of a king who conquered through his own suffering.
And exploring that specific identity is exactly why we're here today. So welcome to Reformed Thinking.
Glad to be here for this one.
Yeah, our mission for this deep dive is to explore one of the most provocative and eternally weighty conversations in human history.
Unpack that a bit. Where are we going?
We are zeroing in on a watershed moment in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8, verses 27 through 33.
Yes. Caesarea Philippi.
Exactly. It's the moment where Jesus turns to his followers and asks the question that just searches the human conscience like nothing else. He asks, "Who do you say that I am?"
It's the turning point of the entire gospel. And to guide us through this, we are drawing from two profoundly deep, historically grounded sources today.
Tell them what we're working with.
So we have a theological essay titled The Christ Who Must Suffer, and a sermon manuscript called The Confession, the Cross, and the Crown.
Both just incredible resources.
Yes, they really are. And both of these documents approach the text through a rigorous Reformed theological framework.
Which means we're going deep.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They aren't just looking at the surface narrative. They are pulling back the curtain on the unalterable decrees of God and the absolute necessity of divine justice.
Which means we are going to get into some heavy, mind-bending theology today.
Buckle up.
Seriously. Because to you listening right now, you might think you know who Jesus is. You might even have the title right.
Right.
But our sources argue forcefully that a true title can very easily be joined to a dangerously false, crossless conception.
That is such a crucial point.
You can have the absolute perfect name for someone, but if you don't understand the job description attached to it, you are living in a complete fantasy.
Yeah, you've invented a different person.
Okay, let's unpack this, and let's start with where this conversation actually happened.
The geography is so important here.
Because to understand the sheer weight of Jesus' interrogation, you have to understand the specific ground he was standing on when he asked it.
Location is everything in this narrative. I mean, Jesus and his disciples have walked away from the familiar, densely populated, culturally Jewish towns around the Sea of Galilee.
Safe territory, basically.
Exactly. And they've trekked about 25 miles north, way up into the borderlands, arriving at the villages of Caesarea Philippi.
And Mark tells us this setting is deliberate.
Oh, absolutely. This is not just a scenic backdrop for a deep dive interview.
It's essentially stepping onto the enemy's home turf. Paint the picture for us.
What did Caesarea Philippi actually look and feel like in the first century?
Well, it was an overwhelming sensory experience. Caesarea Philippi sat at the southwestern base of Mount Hermon, which is this massive snow-capped peak.
Beautiful, but dark.
Very dark. Historically, this area was an ancient epicenter for pagan idolatry. The region used to be called Paneas.
Paneas, okay.
Right, because it was totally dedicated to the worship of Pan, the goat god.
Yeah, the Greco-Roman goat god of nature, chaos, and fertility. And the geography itself fed the religion.
How so?
There was this massive, towering rock cliff face, and right at the base of it was a gaping cave, a grotto, with this seemingly bottomless spring.
Oh, wow.
And the pagans believed this spring was literally a gate to the underworld.
So they thought they were literally standing at the gates of hell.
Exactly. They would perform these incredibly dark, superstitious, and frankly obscene rites there They'd throw animal sacrifices into the abyss to appease these subterranean deities.
Man. So you have this atmosphere thick with ancient, chaotic pagan mysticism. Everywhere you look, there are statues and niches carved right into the rock face.
Yeah, idols everywhere.
But it wasn't just ancient religion, right? It was also a massive monument to modern imperial power.
That's the second layer of this location. Herod the Great had come in and built a massive, gleaming white marble temple right there on that rocky escarpment.
Just dominating the landscape.
Completely. And he didn't dedicate it to the God of Israel. He dedicated it to Caesar Augustus.
Wow.
It was a temple designed for the literal worship of the Roman emperor as a divine figure.
Right.
And later, Herod's son, Philip the Tetrarch, expanded the city even further and named it Caesarea to honor Tiberius Caesar and just tacked on Philippi for his own name.
I want to give the listener a modern parallel to help visualize this, because it's hard to grasp.
Yes, a lot.
Imagine you are standing on a street corner that is somehow a fusion of the Las Vegas Strip, with all its visceral, fleshly indulgence and flashing neon idols, and the absolute center of the Pentagon.
That is a great analogy.
Just projecting total military supremacy and imperial might. You are surrounded by the absolute pinnacle of earthly wealth, cultural dominance, and terrifying political power.
Right.
And standing in the middle of all of that, you have an outwardly unimpressive, impoverished, homeless Jewish rabbi.
Traveling with a small band of ordinary, uneducated guys.
Exactly. And right there, in the shadow of Caesar's gleaming marble temple, surrounded by the shrines of Pan, this rabbi decides to ask his followers about his identity and his kingdom.
The contrast is brilliant. It's so deliberate.
Why there, though? Why not back in Galilee?
Jesus intentionally chose this specific location to strip away all the false expectations his disciples were harboring.
Okay, unpack that.
By placing the eternal, spiritual kingdom of God directly against the backdrop of the terrifying might of the Roman Empire and the darkness of pagan idolatry, he is forcing a massive cognitive dissonance.
He's making them define what power actually looks like.
Exactly.
Because first-century Jewish expectations for the Messiah were completely wrapped up in political liberation.
Oh, 100%.
They wanted a conqueror who would ride in on a war horse, wield a sword, slaughter the Roman legions, and establish Israel as the dominant global superpower.
They essentially wanted a holy version of Caesar.
Right. And by taking them to this monument of worldly militaristic power, Jesus is setting the stage to show them that his kingdom operates on a completely different, inverted paradigm.
It's the total opposite of what they were looking at.
Which really challenges you as the listener to pause right here and consider how your own view of authority is shaped.
Yeah, that's a tough mirror to look into.
We all live surrounded by the empires of our modern world. The empire of corporate wealth, the empire of technological influence, the empire of political tribalism.
And we absorb all of that.
We really do. How much of our expectation of what God should do in our lives is actually just us projecting our culture's definition of power and success onto him?
Well, that tension between our earthly expectations and God's spiritual reality is the exact current running through Mark's gospel.
It's everywhere in the text.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how Mark sets this up, not just geographically, but structurally within his own writing.
Let's transition into that structure then, because our sources emphasize that this conversation in Caesarea Philippi doesn't just happen randomly in the middle of a book.
No, not at all.
It is a very intentional literary turning point.
Mark's gospel is a masterclass in pacing. This specific passage, Mark 8:27-33, is the absolute structural hinge of the entire account.
A hinge, okay.
Yeah, if you look at the first half of the gospel, chapters 1-8, it is entirely consumed by the question of identity. Who is this man?
Right. He's calming storms, casting out demons.
Exactly. Jesus is calming chaotic storms, casting out legions of demons, healing diseases, and everyone, from the religious elite to his own disciples, is wondering who he is.
But then we get to Caesarea Philippi.
And right here, the narrative violently pivots. The second half of the gospel shifts entirely from identity to mission.
From who is he to why did he come?
Yes. From this moment on, the path leads straight, unswervingly, to Jerusalem, Gethsemane, and the cross.
And what I find so compelling in the sources is what Mark chooses to put right before this massive pivot.
The blind man.
Yes. Right before Jesus asks them who he is, Mark records a very specific, unusual miracle, the healing of the blind man at Bethsaida.
It's a miracle unique in the Gospels because Jesus heals the man in two distinct sequential stages.
Walk us through that. How does it happen?
So first, Jesus spits on the man's eyes, touches him, and asks if he sees anything.
Which is pretty intense in itself.
Very. And the man replies, I see people, but they look like trees walking.
So it's not totally fixed.
No. His vision is restored, but it's distorted. It's blurry and confused. Then Jesus lays his hands on the man's eyes a second time, and the text says he opened his eyes, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly.
Now, I have to push back on the theological interpretation of this for a second.
Sure, go for it.
When I read that, the skeptic in me thinks, maybe Mark is just acting as a journalist here? Like he's just writing down a chronological travelogue.
A literal reporting of events.
Exactly. Does this two-stage healing have to be a deeply symbolic literary device? Maybe the man's optic nerve just needed a second jolt of divine energy. Why do our sources insist this is a metaphor?
It's a fair question, but you have to look at how Mark curates his material. Ancient writers didn't waste parchment.
They didn't have word processors.
Right. Space was expensive. The sequence is far too precise to be a medical coincidence. The sources argue this miracle is an enacted object lesson.
A living parable.
Exactly. It is a prophetic, living parable of Peter's exact spiritual state in the very next scene. Mark places it here as an interpretive key for the reader.
Okay, walk us through how that key turns.
Think about the blind man's first stage. He is no longer in total darkness. He has light, but he misinterprets what he's looking at.
Right. He sees men, but assumes they are trees.
Right. He lacks clarity and perspective. In the exact same way, Peter has moved out of the total spiritual blindness of the religious elite. In a moment, he is going to correctly identify Jesus as the Christ.
That's stage one.
That's stage one. But as we'll see, when Jesus explains that the Christ must suffer and be executed, Peter violently rejects it.
Because his spiritual vision is still blurry.
Precisely. He sees the Messiah, but he views him through a distorted, worldly, political lens. He desperately needs a second touch of divine illumination to see the necessity of the cross clearly.
That is a phenomenal connection. And honestly, it makes me think about my own life, and likely the lives of many people listening.
It's incredibly convicting.
It really is. Like, how often do we sit comfortably in that first stage of spiritual vision?
Probably more often than we'd admit.
We see Jesus as our Savior. We give him the right theological titles on Sunday morning, but our vision of what following him actually entails is completely warped.
We want the good stuff.
We want the glory, the blessing, the upward mobility, but our view of his mission, and by extension our own calling, is blurred by our own carnal desires.
Yeah. We see the crown, but the cross looks like a blurry, confusing tree we'd rather just walk around.
Exactly. And that is the exact human condition Jesus is addressing here. And that dynamic leads us directly into the interrogation itself.
The big question.
Right. Having given the disciples this living parable, Jesus moves to diagnose the spiritual blindness of the broader culture, and then he turns a laser focus onto his inner circle.
They are walking on the road, leaving the pagan temples behind, and Jesus asks a general public opinion question: who do men say that I am?
And the disciples basically give him the first century public polling data.
That's a good way to put it. They report back what they've been hearing in the crowds. Well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others say one of the prophets.
Now, to a modern ear, that might just sound like people throwing out random names, like, oh, maybe he's Steve.
Right, just guessing.
Yeah.
But we have to understand the historical context here. These were incredibly respectful, exalted answers.
Let's dig into that. What did it actually mean for a first-century Jewish person to compare Jesus to Elijah?
Oh, Elijah was considered one of the greatest, most powerful prophets in Israel's history. He's the one who called down fire.
Yes, he called down fire from heaven, he confronted corrupt kings, and he didn't even die. He was taken up in a chariot of fire.
So a pretty big deal.
A massive deal. Furthermore, the prophet Malachi had actually predicted that Elijah would return before the great and awesome day of the Lord.
Oh, wow.
So by saying Jesus was Elijah, or John the Baptist raised from the dead, the crowds were putting Jesus in the absolute highest tier of human honor.
They weren't insulting him.
Not at all. They recognized his moral authority, his fiery preaching, and his undeniable supernatural power.
But our sources stress a massive caveat here. While these answers were highly respectful, they were fatally, eternally flawed.
Utterly inadequate.
Why?
Because while the public was willing to give Jesus the absolute highest tier of human honor, they refused to grant him divine authority.
They kept him in a human box.
Exactly. They categorized him as a great man, a prophet, a revolutionary, but still just a man. They fit him into their pre-existing theological boxes. And then the syntax in the original Greek text shifts dramatically, doesn't it? Jesus accepts the polling data, but then he pivots to the men standing right in front of him.
Yes, he uses the emphatic Greek pronoun hymes.
Which means
But who do you say that I am? The contrast is absolute.
he's putting them on the spot.
He is isolating them from the safety of public opinion. He's saying, you can't just quote what the culture says about me. You have to make a declaration.
And Peter, who so often acts as the vocal representative for the entire group, steps up and delivers this definitive, unqualified confession. He says, "You are the Christ."
And that word in Greek is Christos,
Right.
which is the direct translation of the Hebrew Mashiach, or Messiah, the anointed one, the promised king of the line of David.
It is the foundational bedrock confession of the Christian faith. Peter gets the identity perfectly right.
He hits the nail on the head. Stage one vision is clear.
But what's fascinating here is how the sources draw a staggering parallel between the crowds in the first century and the religious landscape today.
Oh, this part is sobering.
It really is.
Yeah.
They point to the 2024 Ligonier State of Theology report, which is this massive survey tracking theological beliefs in America.
Right.
They surveyed professed evangelical churchgoers, like people who sit in the pews every Sunday, and they found that 53% believe that Jesus was a great teacher, but he was not God.
More than half.
I remember reading that, and I just had to put the paper down. More than half. These aren't secular sociologists or atheists on the street. These are people who identify as believers.
It shows that modern evangelicalism is facing the exact same spiritual pathogen that infected the crowds at Caesarea Philippi.
We haven't changed at all.
We really haven't. There is this widespread willingness to give Jesus a place of high human honor. We love Jesus as a moral reformer.
Sure.
We love him as a life coach who gives us principles for a happy marriage. We love him as a champion of social causes who fought for the marginalized.
Right.
But we entirely reject his unique, uncreated deity and his sovereign, demanding authority.
That distinction is so critical for the listener to grasp. Admiration is not faith.
No, it's not.
Treating Jesus as an inspiring historical figure or a therapeutic guide is not Christianity. According to the text, and according to these deep theological sources, it is just a highly refined, culturally polite form of unbelief.
Wow. Culturally polite unbelief. That's exactly what it is.
Think about it. If Jesus is just a great teacher, you maintain your autonomy.
Right. You're still in charge.
Exactly. You can listen to his advice, take what works for you, discard the rest. But if he is the Christ, the eternal Son of the living God, you lose all your autonomy.
He demands absolute, unreserved surrender of every aspect of your life.
And Jesus immediately moves to test the reality of that surrender. Because once Peter gets the identity right, once he names the title, Jesus instantly shifts to the mission.
He commands them to tell no one, which seems odd until you remember that the public's idea of the Messiah is heavily contaminated with ideas of violent political revolution.
Right. If word gets out, they might try to start an uprising.
Exactly. Jesus doesn't want crowds trying to make him a military king. Instead, he begins to teach his inner circle how redemption will actually be accomplished.
And this is where we hit verse 31, and the theology gets incredibly deep. Jesus doesn't refer to himself as the Messiah here. He shifts to the title, Son of Man.
That title is the absolute key to understanding Jesus' self-conception. He is drawing Son of Man directly from the Old Testament, specifically from Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14.
Break down that Daniel prophecy for us, because I think a lot of people hear Son of Man, and they think it just means Jesus was emphasizing his humanity, like I am a human being.
A lot of people think that.
But it means the exact opposite, doesn't it?
Entirely the opposite. In Daniel 7, the prophet sees a vision of the Ancient of Days God the Father sitting on a throne of fire.
Okay.
And approaching him on the clouds of heaven is a glorious, cosmic, divine figure called the Son of Man.
And what happens to him?
To him is given everlasting dominion, glory, and a universal kingdom that will never be destroyed, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. Wow.
It is a title of supreme, unassailable divine exaltation. First-century Jews knew this text. When Jesus claims this title, he is claiming cosmic sovereignty.
But then, and this is where the cognitive dissonance shatters the disciples, he pairs this glorious, cosmic, unconquerable title with an incredibly heavy, fatalistic Greek word.
The word dei.
Dei.
Yes. Dei is an impersonal verb that translates to it is necessary or must And our sources spend a massive amount of time on this one little word.
Because it changes everything.
It does. From a Reformed theological perspective, this must is not talking about blind Stoic faith.
Yeah.
It's not a tragic political accident.
He just was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Exactly. Jesus didn't just agitate the wrong religious leaders and get caught in the gears of the Roman justice system.
I have to stop you there because I want to make sure this is crystal clear for the listener.
Go for it.
When you say it wasn't an accident, what does that actually mean? Because from a strictly historical perspective, looking from the outside, it looks exactly like a political assassination. It looks like things just got out of hand.
Right. He angered the establishment and they executed him. How does theology reshape that historical event?
Well, theology reveals the architecture underneath the history.
I like that phrase.
This dei, this must, represents the immutable, unalterable decree of Almighty God. The sources point us to a concept known as the covenant of redemption, or in Latin theological terms, the pactum salutis.
The pactum salutis.
Yes. This is an eternal agreement made between the persons of the Trinity in the halls of heaven before time even began, before the universe was even spoken into existence.
So before Genesis 1.1, there was a covenant.
Exactly. The Father appointed the Son to be the mediator for a fallen humanity that didn't even exist yet.
That is mind-blowing to think about.
It really is. And the Son voluntarily agreed to step out of eternity, assume a frail human nature, and lay down his life as a substitutionary sacrifice to satisfy the infinite demands of divine justice.
So when Jesus says the Son of Man must suffer, he is referencing this eternal contract.
Yes. He is essentially saying, I have a divine appointment with the wrath of God, and I cannot be late.
Wow. And the sources outline this path to the cross as a fourfold decree.
Yeah.
Jesus lays out exactly what is going to happen to him.
Step by step.
Right. He says the Son of Man must suffer many things. He must be officially rejected, he must be brutally killed, and he must rise after 3 days.
Let's break down the vocabulary Mark uses here, because the language is incredibly precise.
Yeah, let's get into the Greek.
Jesus predicts being rejected by the elders, chief priests, and scribes. The Greek word for rejected here is apodokomasthanai.
Apodokomasthanai. Okay, I love the linguistic breakdown of this word in the sources. I want to try an analogy here to see if it captures the weight of it.
Let's hear it.
Think about a modern pharmaceutical company developing a new, groundbreaking drug.
Okay.
It goes through phase 1 trials to see if it's safe, then phase 2 for efficacy, then phase 3 with thousands of patients. Finally, it goes before the highest board of review at the FDA.
Right, the ultimate authority.
Exactly. The scientists and regulators scrutinize every single data point, every molecular structure. And after all that rigorous testing, the board slams a red stamp on it that says, rejected, unfit for human consumption, banned. Is that the kind of testing we are talking about here?
That is a brilliant way to understand it. Apodokomasthanai is a civic, legal term used in the ancient world for officially testing candidates for a public office, or a metallurgist testing gold to see if it's pure.
So it's not a casual dismissal.
Not at all. Jesus isn't saying he's going to be the victim of a random mob lynching. He is saying, I am going to be subjected to the highest, most rigorous official scrutiny of the supreme religious Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin.
The highest earthly authority of God's people.
Exactly. They are going to examine my claims, and they are going to formally, legally declare me unfit, worthless, and blasphemous.
And following that official rejection comes the execution. The sources point out that Mark uses a very violent verb here, apoktino.
Apoktino, yes.
Which emphasizes brutal judicial murder. It's not just passing away peacefully, it is being slaughtered.
And to understand why this brutal slaughter was necessary, we have to touch on the underlying principles of the Westminster Confession, specifically regarding Christ's role as the mediator.
Why did it have to be so violent?
Because the law of God is a reflection of his perfectly holy nature. It demands absolute perfection, and God's justice demands that any rebellion, any sin must be punished.
Right. A just judge cannot simply sweep crimes under the rug.
Exactly. But fallen humanity is completely, totally incapable of providing that perfect obedience or paying that infinite debt.
We are bankrupt.
Morally and spiritually bankrupt. Which is where the mechanisms of the atonement come in. The sources explain this through the concepts of Christ's passive and active obedience.
Okay, let's do a deep dive into those terms because passive obedience sounds like an oxymoron.
It does sound weird in English.
Yeah, it sounds like Jesus just sat back and lazily let things happen to him. What does that actually mean in a theological sense?
It's a great clarification to make. Passive in this theological context comes from the Latin word passio, which means suffering or enduring.
Oh, like the Passion of the Christ.
Exactly. It doesn't mean inactivity. It means that Christ willingly submitted himself to bear the infinite penalty of divine wrath on the cross.
Okay, so how does that work for us?
Imagine standing in a courtroom. You have committed 10,000 capital crimes. The judge sentences you to a multi-million-dollar fine that you can never pay and execution.
A hopeless situation.
Completely. Passive obedience is Christ stepping into the courtroom, pushing you out of the defendant's chair, taking the execution upon himself, and absorbing the full fury of the judge's righteous anger in your place.
Wow.
He wipes the debt to zero.
That handles the debt. But wiping my debt to zero just leaves me neutral. I'm out of the red, but I have nothing in the bank. It doesn't make me righteous.
Exactly. You're just back at zero. And that is where active obedience comes in.
So what's the active part?
Throughout his entire earthly life, from the cradle to the grave, Jesus actively, flawlessly kept every single demand of God's moral law.
He never sinned once.
Never. He loved God perfectly and loved his neighbor perfectly. He earned a flawless record of righteousness.
Okay, I see where this is going.
So back in our courtroom analogy, not only does he pay your unimaginable debt, that's the passive part, but he then takes his multi-billion-dollar bank account of perfect righteousness and transfers it into your empty account.
That's the active part.
Yes. In theology, this is called imputation.
Imputation. That is staggering.
It is the absolute heart of the gospel. And that is why the cross must happen. Without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin.
He had to do it.
He had to. Jesus is executing a brilliant theological synthesis here. He is taking the victorious, conquering, cosmic Son of Man from Daniel 7, and he is fusing it perfectly with the crushed, humiliated, suffering servant of Isaiah 53, the one who is wounded for our transgressions and crushed for our iniquities.
It's a paradox. It makes perfect sense.
Exactly. He is looking his disciples in the eye and telling them, I am the King of glory, but the path to my eternal throne goes directly through the slaughterhouse.
Which brings us to the emotional explosion of the text. Because while the cross was a beautiful divine necessity in the mind of God, to a human mind focused on earthly glory, it sounds like absolute, unhinged madness.
Oh, to Peter it sounds insane.
The text says Jesus spoke this plainly. The Greek word is parrhesia, meaning unreserved, unambiguous free speech.
No more parables about seeds and soils.
Right. He just laid out the brutal, bloody reality of the cross. And Peter's reaction, it is breathtaking in its sheer arrogance.
It really is.
Peter takes Jesus aside, and the grammatical participle used there, poslaboenos, carries this incredibly patronizing, condescending connotation.
He literally grabs Jesus.
Yes, he grabs him by the arm or by his garment, physically pulls him away from the group, and begins to rebuke him. Let's expand on an analogy here because we really need to feel the audacity of this moment.
Yeah, contextualize it for us.
Imagine you are a first-year medical student who has barely learned how to take blood pressure. You are standing in the operating room, watching the world's top neurosurgeon perform a microscopic brain surgery to save a patient's life.
High stakes.
The highest. The surgeon makes a complex incision, and you, the student, march up to the table, slap the scalpel out of the surgeon's hand, pull them into the hallway, and start lecturing them on why their technique is going to kill the patient.
That's horrifying to even picture.
It's exactly like that, except infinitely worse. Because this isn't just a student and a teacher. This is a creature made of dust, pulling the sovereign creator of the universe into a corner to tell him that his eternal redemptive plan is flawed.
And the Greek text highlights a terrifying irony here regarding the specific word Peter uses to do this.
Oh, tell me about that.
Yes, Mark tells us that Peter began to rebuke Jesus. The word is epitomao.
Epitomao.
It is an incredibly strong word. It is the exact same verb that Jesus uses throughout the gospel to cast out demonic spirits and to violently silence the raging chaos of the sea.
Wow. Are you serious? So he is trying to exorcise the Savior?
He is. Peter is attempting to exorcise the Creator's plan of redemption. He is trying to cast the cross out of the Christ.
That's chilling.
Peter wanted the crown. He wanted the political victory over Rome. He wanted to sit at the right hand of the imperial throne in a liberated Jerusalem. But he recoiled in absolute horror at the altar of sacrifice.
Which proves exactly what our sources established at the very beginning. A true title, You Are the Christ, joined to a dangerously false, crossless conception.
Stage 1 vision.
Exactly. Peter loved the Messiah of his own imagination. He loved the conquering king. But he was deeply offended by the bleeding, suffering Messiah actually standing in front of him.
And because Peter's actions threaten the very core of the gospel, Jesus has to respond. I mean, if Peter succeeds in talking Jesus out of the cross, humanity is damned forever.
The stakes are eternal.
So Jesus unleashes the most severe, devastating rebuke recorded in the entire New Testament.
So what does this all mean? How does the King of Glory handle an insurrection from his own lead disciple?
First, notice the physical posture Jesus takes. Mark says Jesus turned and looked at all the disciples.
He makes sure they're watching.
Right. He physically breaks away from Peter's private huddle, spins around and makes sure everyone is paying attention. He ensures this is not a private, swept-under-the-rug dispute.
Right. This is a teaching moment.
This is a public, foundational lesson for the entire future church. And then he drops the verdict on Peter. Get behind me, Satan.
Which is an incredibly heavy thing to hear from the lips of your rabbi.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to clarify this for the listener. He's not saying Peter has literally been possessed or transformed into the devil, right?
No. Peter hasn't been ontologically transubstantiated into Lucifer.
Right.
But Jesus is identifying the source and the dark nature of Peter's counsel. Think back to the beginning of Jesus' ministry.
The temptation in the wilderness.
Exactly. Peter's words here are a direct, chilling echo of that wilderness temptation, where Satan offered Jesus all the kingdoms of the world if he would just bow down and bypass the suffering.
Wow, it's the exact same temptation.
It is. The core temptation of hell is always, take the kingdom without the cross, claim the glory, but avoid the pain. By offering that exact counsel, Peter has unwittingly allowed himself to become a mouthpiece for the adversary.
And then Jesus gives the profound theological diagnosis for why Peter fell into this trap. He says, "For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man."
The Greek word there for setting your mind is phronio.
Phronio, what does that imply?
It's a crucial philosophical and theological term. It doesn't just mean having a fleeting, passing thought. It refers to your deep-seated orientation, your worldview, your foundational values, the engine that drives your affections.
So his whole operating system was flawed.
Exactly. Peter's entire mindset, his phronio, was enslaved to human instinct. Self-preservation, safety, political power, visible earthly success, avoiding pain at all costs.
Which makes sense from a human perspective, but it's completely wrong here.
He was completely blind to the holy priorities of God, which demanded the satisfaction of divine justice through a bloody sacrifice.
And Jesus follows that searing diagnosis with a physical command. He says, "Get behind me."
The Greek phrase is opisomou.
Upisomou.
Yes, it's literal spatial discipleship language. When Peter grabbed Jesus and pulled him aside, he was trying to step in front of Jesus to direct his path.
Right.
He stopped being a follower and tried to become the master. He tried to become the GPS for the Savior.
Like, I know a better route, let's go this way.
Exactly. And Jesus forcefully banishes him back to the proper spatial and spiritual posture of a disciple. Get back in line. Your job is not to lead me. Stand behind me and follow where I walk.
Which brings up such a piercing question for you, the listener, to consider. Because it is so easy to judge Peter here, reading this 2,000 years later.
It's very easy to be an armchair quarterback.
Right. But how often do we, as modern readers, try to negotiate the terms of our discipleship with God?
All the time.
How often does our mindset, our deep-seated phronio, prioritize human self-preservation, our comfort, our financial safety, and our visible social success over God's holy priorities?
It's a daily struggle.
When God's word directly contradicts our modern cultural sensibilities, do we submit to it? Or do we metaphorically try to pull Jesus into the hallway and correct him?
It's the ultimate test of our submission to divine revelation. When the Bible offends us, do we conform our minds to the Word, or do we try to conform the Word to our minds?
And that profound tension is exactly why this passage from Mark is so fiercely relevant today. It isn't just ancient history.
No, it echoes through every century.
Which brings us to the final major movement of our deep dive today. Pastoral comfort, polemical confrontation, and true discipleship. What does this ancient confrontation at Caesarea Philippi mean for the church throughout history? And specifically, what does it mean for you today?
To really understand the application, we have to start by looking at the original audience. The sources remind us that John Mark didn't write this gospel in a vacuum.
He wasn't just in an ivory tower.
Exactly. He likely wrote it for Roman Christians in the mid-60s AD. This ties directly back to what you mentioned at the very beginning of our deep dive. The horrific state-sponsored persecution under Emperor Nero.
Right. Believers being used as human torches.
Exactly. In that brutal environment, faith in a crucified, bleeding Jewish Messiah looked like absolute pathetic weakness to the Roman elite who valued power, stoicism, and military victory.
So they were under immense pressure to change the message.
The temptation for those early Christians to compromise, to soften the message, or to seek a comfortable, socially acceptable, crossless faith was immense.
Yeah.
Mark includes this brutal rebuke of Peter to teach those suffering believers a profound pastoral truth.
Which is?
If the master was bound by divine decree to endure rejection, hatred, and death before entering his glory, the servants will absolutely experience the same.
It's unavoidable.
Suffering and social shame are not signs that God has abandoned you. They are the exact path the king walked.
But the sources we are studying don't just leave this theological application in the first century, do
No,
they?
they bring it right to our front door.
They draw a straight, piercing line from Peter's satanic rebuke directly to several modern movements in the church today. Now, as we dive into this section, I want to be incredibly clear to our listeners. We are neutrally reporting the arguments laid out in these rigorous theological essays. The authors of these sources use this passage in Mark 8 as a blueprint to launch some very intense cultural and theological critiques.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the foundational argument of the sources is that any theology, any church movement, or any personal philosophy that seeks the crown of glory without the suffering of the cross is a spiritual descendant of Peter's rebuke.
For example, the sources explicitly condemn the prosperity gospel and the word of faith movements.
Yes. The authors argue that when a preacher stands up and teaches that God guarantees physical ease, financial wealth, perfect health, and visible earthly success, while entirely ignoring the biblical calls to suffering, persecution, and self-denial,
They've lost the plot.
they have essentially codified Peter's error into a religion. They are peddling a crossless Christianity. They want the resurrection power of the Messiah to get a better job or a bigger house, but they reject the suffering servant.
The essays also take aim at pragmatic, seeker-sensitive church growth models.
Right, the megachurch strategies.
They assert that when modern churches intentionally water down the offensive, blood-soaked doctrines of the cross, when they stop talking about divine wrath, total depravity, and substitutionary atonement just to be culturally relevant and avoid offending secular people, they are failing to speak the truth plainly, as Jesus did.
They lose the parrhesia.
Exactly. The argument is that these models prioritize the things of man, like church attendance, cultural approval, likability over the things of God, like holiness, truth, and repentance.
The sources go even further into contemporary debates, explicitly denouncing the infiltration of liberal theology, critical race theory, and modern social justice movements within the church.
This is where it gets highly debated today. Let's unpack their logic there. Why do they connect that to Peter?
Well, the sources argue that these movements view humanity primarily through the lens of earthly power dynamics, oppressor versus oppressed, systemic structures, and political liberation.
Which sounds a lot like the first century context.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
sounds suspiciously like the first century Jewish expectation of a Messiah who would overthrow the oppressive Roman systems. The authors argue that by focusing so heavily on human political structures rather than humanity's foundational spiritual rebellion against a holy God and the desperate need for substitutionary atonement, these movements repeat Peter's exact mistake.
So they're saying it's a distraction.
They argue that they obsess over the things of man rather than God's eternal redemptive decree.
And finally, approaching this from a distinctively Protestant historical angle, the sources use this text to refute Roman Catholic claims of papal infallibility.
This is a really interesting historical connection.
It is. They point out the fascinating historical irony that Mark, who history tells us, was writing down Peter's own personal testimony, highlights Peter uttering a literal satanic heresy mere moments after his great foundational confession.
Right. Peter is basically writing his own worst moment into the history books.
Exactly. And the theological argument made by the sources is that the true church is built on the objective truth of Peter's confession of Christ, not on the flawless, infallible person of Peter himself, who clearly needed severe biblical correction.
So whether you, the listener, agree with their specific cultural critiques of CRT or their denominational critiques of Rome or not, you can see how these authors are utilizing Mark 8 as an architectural blueprint for their theology.
Yeah, the pattern is undeniable.
They view any theological system that minimizes suffering, divine wrath, or the necessity of the atonement as a dangerous echo of Caesarea Philippi.
Which leaves us with the reality that is impossible to ignore. You simply cannot separate the eternal identity of Christ from the bloody work of his cross.
They are forever linked.
Any personal belief system that removes the scandal, the suffering, and the absolute divine necessity of the cross is not a variation of Christianity. It is a manufactured idol.
It is. If you strip away the blood, the sacrifice, and the satisfaction of divine justice, you are left with a hollow, therapeutic philosophy that has absolutely no power to save a human soul from the wrath to come.
The true Christ walks knowingly, deliberately, and obediently toward Calvary.
He embraces the day.
We've covered an incredible amount of theological and historical ground today on Reformed thinking. We started in the dark, idolatrous shadow of Caesar's temples and the grotto of Pan in Caesarea Philippi, surrounded by monuments to ultimate human power.
We really went deep into that context.
We did. We unpacked the profound two-stage miracle of the blind man at Bethsaida, exploring how our own spiritual vision can be crystal clear on the who, but dangerously blurry on the how.
Stage 1 versus Stage 2.
We dove deep into the immense weight of the divine must, the unalterable covenant of redemption that required the glorious Son of Man to suffer actively and passively to satisfy divine justice.
The Pactum Salutis.
And we witnessed the staggering arrogance of Peter attempting to exorcise the cross from his Creator, leading to Christ's terrifying counterstrike to protect the gospel itself.
It is a text that does not allow you to remain a passive observer. Admiration of Jesus is just not enough.
You have to make a choice.
You have to get behind him and follow the path he dictates, not the one you prefer.
Which brings me to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with. Something for you to deeply ponder on your own that builds on everything we've just discussed regarding the necessity of suffering.
Let's hear it.
We spent all this time analyzing how Peter violently rejected the cross because, to his human, politically oriented mind, it looked like total catastrophic failure. Rejection, official condemnation, torture, death, that is the vocabulary of absolute defeat.
From a human perspective, yes.
But think about your own life for a moment. If Jesus' absolute greatest triumph, the cosmic salvation of humanity, the crushing of Satan's head, the fulfillment of the eternal covenant, was accomplished through a bloody, humiliating state-sponsored execution that every single human observer on that Friday deemed a miserable, pathetic failure. What does that mean for the seasons of your life that you currently view as failures or setbacks?
That is a profound paradigm shift.
Is it possible that the areas where you feel most defeated today, the places where your meticulously crafted plans have been shattered, the relationships that are broken, the careers that have stalled, where you feel like you are walking through a dark valley of humiliation?
Yeah.
Is it possible that those are actually the exact sovereignly ordained instruments God is using to shape your eternal glory? What if your greatest failure is simply a cross you haven't yet recognized as a divine tool of redemption? Because at the end of the day, it all comes back to how we started. We are so obsessed with titles. We want the title of victor, success, influencer, blessed. But the true Christ, the Lord of the universe, willingly took the title of suffering servant. And he demands that if we want to wear his name, we have to be willing to walk his road.
That's a heavy, beautiful truth to walk away with.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep wrestling with the text, keep asking the hard questions, and we will see you next time on Reformed Thinking.